Okay, the first question on Wi-Fi in schools. What is the best way to start this conversation if you're concerned with your schools? How do you start it? Now, I know several of you have had a lot of experience doing this, so I'll ask each of you to try to give an answer in 60 seconds because I know you've had experience with it, but that's a very important question. People want to know, what do you do to start the conversation with people who might think you've parked your spaceship somewhere?
Okay. Since I have the microphone, I'll go first. Don't go alone. Get your friends educated, get the grandparents educated, and get everybody around your children educated, and then as a group, go in and begin the conversation. Please know at the state level, the industry has been incredibly effective at promoting their 21st century classroom to state level administrators who had no idea it's very harmful to our teachers and our students. And so they are now holding, at least in Massachusetts, our school districts accountable. So if you go in and present to a school committee, they may get it on some level, but they're going to sit there like deer in the headlights because their jobs are on the line if they're not implementing the 21st century classroom.
I'll add as well that get your information together to be concise. And I meant to mention this in the last presentation I did, that Maryland is the first state to have recommendations of a state body recommending reducing radio frequency radiation in schools. So this was a 19-member panel that included the Department of Education, and one of the things that was really important, I think, for other states is if there's not a group that their goal is to protect children, and they have environmental health experts and public health experts, those people will understand and be able to best also look at this issue. So this is sort of another way in. There's many ways to address this issue, is to ensure that whatever group is looking at this issue doesn't have vested interests and has a public health background, and they're committed to children's health. And yes, don't go alone. And really educating people one-on-one is also really incredibly important. I would also mention explaining what's happening in other countries. Like Cyprus has banned Wi-Fi in elementary schools. France has turned it off as the default. Like, you know, in the United States, we have a lot of private schools that are removing wireless. Sometimes it's parents who are actually bringing forward the solutions and paying for those solutions or crowdfunding for it. But, and contact us anytime on this issue as well.
I think knowing the fact is really important. I think the most important 3.5 minutes you're going to have in any lecture on this topic will be explaining the terms, because if you're going to have a presentation and they don't understand what you're saying, thermal effects, radio frequencies, micro frequencies, you just lose your audience. So learn how to explain those terms clearly. If possible, take an expert with you, someone who can confirm what you're saying, so it will be more difficult for them to negate what you're saying. Understand the other side's problems. As I said, they're very invested in this technology. They spend millions putting it together. Exposing sickness in the schools scare them. So you have to understand where they're coming from and see how we can work with them together. And we had a lot of really good experiences, like we had a good experience here in Michigan. And actually by the middle of our presentation, the school principal actually apologized. And he told the parents, I'm sorry for harming your kids. So you can get through, know the facts, explain them, present good information. And, after all, these people are in this profession to take care of the future of these children, work with them.
Excellent. Let me give you one word social scientists have. It's gatekeeper. Every community has gatekeepers. They tend to be your doctors, your lawyers, your teachers, and go in with those people with you. Get a physician if you possibly can. Theodora, tell us about the American Academy of Pediatrics and what resources they have offered.
The American Academy of Pediatrics has 10 recommendations to reduce exposure, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But one is very important. That is to pre-download information before handing a device to a child, so you're not exposed to unnecessary radiation. So going in with that, we also have, and putting it on airplane mode and turning the Wi-Fi off like Ashland's recommends. We have a public service announcement, and actually many public service announcements at Environmental Health Trust under public service announcement, including Cyprus, which they have these short 2 to 3 minute videos, which are very powerful on reducing exposure during pregnancy, reducing exposure to teenagers, and reducing exposure if you're a parent. And it's just amazing to see what other countries have done, and that can really strengthen as you go in. Just saying, this is happening. It's happening across the world.
France has banned cell phones in schools, all schools. They have banned cell phones in schools. Macron delivered on that campaign promise, and his wife was a teacher, so they were finding, and as many teachers know, this becomes hugely distracting in schools. And Israel took steps to prevent the use of cell phones for so-called educational purposes, recognizing that once you allow a kid to have a phone in school, it's like giving them crack. It's saying, we'll only use it for educational purposes. Well, good luck with that.
Can I say one more thing? I think that it's really important to provide those examples because no one wants to be the first. So if you bring with you those examples of other schools, other counties, other states that did something, that will give a lot of courage to that school principal or district to take action and not to be the first.
And sign up for our newsletter so you can get up to date on all the latest, because Theodora does an amazing job, really, of keeping all that list up to date. It's quite extensive. A question is, what is the impact of computer-mandated testing in schools on the wireless situation? Cece?
I'll just say one sentence, and that is that when we have gone to principals to talk about this issue, teachers that are ready to take action on this say, but we can't because of the testing, because every part of our school becomes, we need the wireless to be on, and so this is the reason why we can't do what we actually think is a really good idea. Now, I believe this can all be done wired, but it is actually one of the reasons they're putting in these wireless network is for the testing.
May I ask, what age students are you teaching, and what are you finding is the impact on your students?
We use wireless for testing, but I've tried to go into the lab. I don't know if it makes a difference because I've tried to get the kids not to use the wireless laptop anymore, and I've also changed some of the devices in my classroom back to the old way. But I could tell you, after 27 years of being a teacher, that I have noticed that I've had an increase in headaches and in migraines, which I've never experienced before. And in my students, I've also seen these children getting more frequent headaches, increasing autism, migraines in particular, bloody noses. I have kids getting bloody noses, running down the hallways with bloody noses. Lack of focus, outbursts, higher levels of stress and unable to deal with that stress. Hyperactivity, tired to the point of falling asleep in the classroom. Hopefully that's not because they're bored. An increase in the number of students taking medications for a number of illnesses. Overall poor health. It's so sad to see over the years how sick these kids are with asthma, allergies, stomach problems, intestinal problems, nausea, children vomiting. We get vomiting on a daily basis. An increase in ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Kids on medication for this all over the place. An increase in learning disabilities overall, mood swings, poor memory skills, poor cognitive skills, children that are way behind grade level. I have kids, I'm middle school. I have kids that are at a second, third grade level. And I try my best to get them up to par, but it's really difficult. And I've experienced more and more children at that level.
I want to invite you to write a note to us that we would feature on all of our social media, highlighting your observations. It's really important for someone with your experience on the ground to share this information. It really is. There's nothing that can compare with it. And I want to thank you very much for providing it to us. I'd like to ask you as an attorney if you could share with us some of your experiences and finding that what has happened with your children. And
Well,
where you-
I didn't have any legal recourse when I removed my children from the Cranbrook Kingswood School program. They were in the 3rd grade and in kindergarten, and I went to a teachers' conference in November, typically the first one of the year, and we were sitting in the room and looked up, and on the wall about 6 or 8 feet from where I was sitting, I saw this antenna with these large white spokes coming out, and I was sitting at my son's desk. That's where the teachers' conference was, and I asked the teacher, what is this? Well, over the summer we put in industrial, she didn't use the word strength,
Levels,
but
yeah.
sort of an
Right.
industrial system, because our teachers were complaining they didn't have connectivity throughout the school, and it's an older building. And any of you might know the Cranbrook campus. It's extraordinary, and the buildings are extraordinary. But we really looked at that and said, you know, that explains a little bit to us. We thought our son was having some anxiety, you know, came home kind of perspired and just not really acting himself. And a day later, we wrote to the school, said we were very concerned, asked to meet with the head of the lower school. We went in with a lot of information, went in with letters from doctors at MIT, talked about in California, where they had explained best practices for lower schools and for elementary schools. And he said, well, you know, it's not conclusive one way or the other, whether there's health considerations or not. And I said, well, if you take that position, clearly there are risks I've pointed out. You're saying maybe there's not risks. Let's employ the precautionary principle. Let's assume there are risks, and let's try to mitigate them. I even offered, because I had the financial wherewithal to do it, to say, if you will reconsider and wire this school, I can help you with this sort of a contribution. It's a private school, and if it costs more than what I'm capable of doing, I'll make it my point to raise those additional dollars. I met with the headmaster, Arla Siebert, I met with everyone that we could, and although they were very sympathetic and there were tears shed about our leaving, we wound up taking our children out of that school. They never
Well
went
done.
back. We homeschooled them, and now they go to a very small Christian school, which still has eraser boards and the like, and my children are thriving and love it. And, you know, I look back, I'm an older father, and I think back about my education, my math skills, my English skills, and the like. I didn't have any of those things. I didn't have iPads, I didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of that. And still, some of us in our 60s are not that dumb. You know, we're okay. You know, we
There's actually-
manage. So I
right.
don't know what they're going to learn with all this high
I'm
technology that is
actually-
going to make them more articulate.
I very much
you know?
appreciate your sharing your story. Actually, there are studies showing that with respect to retention and learning, that children learn best, as do we all, with paper and pencil, and that if you try to jumpstart it or leapfrog that process, you're interfering with neurodevelopment in the young developing brain. Cece, yes,
Oh,
go ahead.
Actually, let me just say, there was a series of articles written by the New York Times at the end of October, and they were featuring what the Silicon Valley executives are doing. And they are sending their children to schools with no technology. They're having their nannies sign contracts that the children are not to have any exposure to screens when in the care of the nannies. So that tells us, and if you follow the dollar and find out why we have Common Core standards with all that testing, I think you'll find it points right back to industry at the state and national level. And they identified our children as an untapped market, and their goal is to have a one-to-one device in the hands of all of our children, because once you have a child as a consumer, you pretty much get them for life.
Yes.
I want to tell you, so
I'm
I
sorry,
think,
she had one other point.
I wanted to quickly add to what she was saying about the paper and pencil. Our Amish friends visited, or they invited us to visit their school, and we spent the day with those kids. I know it's night and day from what us English people's way of life is, but just to point out, those kids not only retained information better, but they were calm and relaxed and happy. And that doesn't mean that they weren't excited and being children, because they did have a snowball fight with my husband. But It was totally night and day from what I experience every day with my kids in the classroom.
So, as you know, my passion really is children. That's how I started the journey with this issue, taking the Israeli government to court on the issue of Wi-Fi in the schools. Now, I think that parents should not send their children to schools with Wi-Fi. The science is clear. The children are sick. This is your responsibility as parents to protect the health of your children. And if the schools are forcing your children to be exposed to this radiation, be bold in your action, show impatience. And I've been in touch with many parents around the world and in the US. Those who take bold actions are able to change. There's now a school in Israel. They had a cell tower outside the high school. About 80 children developed microwave sickness. They stopped the school, made a demonstration. Children stopped going to school. The city immediately announced to take action. The wireless industry announced they're removing that cell tower away, and the court gave an order to remove that cell tower. Be bold. This is the health and safety of your children. Do not compromise.